Look around you. How much of your life is being thrown away right now? How many hours vanish into distraction? How many opportunities are abandoned because you're too afraid or too comfortable? Take responsibility. You know it deep down. You could be more, you should be more, but you're wasting time. And if you keep wasting it, that waste becomes your life. So the question is simple: will you stand up and carry the weight that could make you into who you're meant to be? Or will you watch your life slip into nothing? Life, at its very foundation, is suffering. And this is not a claim to be debated away or avoided. It is a reality as ancient as existence itself. From the moment you are born, you are subject to pain, limitation, struggle, loss, and ultimately death. To pretend otherwise is to live in a lie. But the tragedy is that many people think the way to lessen this suffering is to avoid responsibility, to retreat into comfort, to try to hide from the weight of life's demands. They imagine that if they can just escape obligation, they will be free, that life will somehow become easier. Yet that illusion is the most dangerous one of all, because when you abandon responsibility, you do not actually escape suffering, you intensify it. Neglect and avoidance are not neutral. They accumulate into something poisonous, something that corrodes your mind and spirit over time until you can barely recognize yourself. The problem with running from responsibility is that you do not get to decide the price. Life extracts it from you in interest, compounding every day you neglect what you know you must face. You feel it in the guilt that gnaws at you when you procrastinate, in the shame that creeps in when you realize you're weaker than you could be, in the quiet despair that grows louder the longer you refuse to act. Every ignored duty becomes a weight you carry, not a weight that strengthens you, but a weight that breaks you down. You try to push it into the shadows, but it lingers there, waiting, growing, turning into chaos that eventually spills out into every corner of your existence. Consider how quickly life deteriorates when responsibility is rejected. Ignore your health, and your body decays until suffering is multiplied 100-fold. Ignore your relationships, and resentment festers until trust collapses into betrayal and loneliness. Ignore your work, and poverty, stagnation, and humiliation greet you in the end. Responsibility is not optional. It is the structure of reality pressing against you, reminding you that everything you neglect has consequences. The belief that you can somehow escape it without paying is childish, and worse, it condemns you to a future far bleaker than the effort you thought you were avoiding in the first place. The unavoidable truth is that life's suffering can only be met, endured, and redeemed through responsibility. Without it, you have nothing to aim at, nothing to steady yourself with, nothing to justify the pain. Without responsibility, suffering becomes unbearable, meaningless, and cruel. This is why people collapse into despair when they refuse to stand up. They cannot reconcile their pain with any purpose. Responsibility gives the suffering structure. It transforms it from something destructive into something productive. It makes pain tolerable, even meaningful. If life is suffering, then your only choice is how you will face it. With avoidance that multiplies chaos, or with responsibility that transforms it into strength. Avoiding responsibility might feel like liberation in the short term, but in reality, it is a trap that slowly enslaves you to chaos and meaninglessness. When you put off what you know must be done, you hand over control of your own life to forces that do not have your best interest at heart. The duties you refuse to face do not simply disappear. They accumulate, and in that accumulation, they gain power over you. Every neglected task becomes a shadow that grows larger and darker, waiting for the moment when it can overwhelm you completely. What began as a small act of avoidance soon becomes a habit, and that habit begins to shape your character, weakening your resolve, dulling your will, and leaving you vulnerable to despair. The illusion of freedom without responsibility is seductive because it promises ease and comfort. You think that by walking away from a burden, you will escape its weight. But life is not structured that way. The burden you refuse to carry grows heavier, not lighter, and eventually it returns in a form much harder to endure. The messy room you do not clean becomes unlivable. The relationships you avoid repairing collapse entirely. The opportunities you delay pursuing vanish, leaving regret in their place. By refusing responsibility, you are not sidestepping suffering. You are creating a future where suffering dominates every aspect of your life. What felt like a temporary relief becomes a permanent prison, one that you built with your own hands through inaction. People often think responsibility is restrictive, but in truth, it is irresponsibility that confines you the most. Without responsibility, you drift. You have no anchor, no direction, no guiding principle that gives shape to your days. Instead of building something meaningful, you become subject to whims and impulses that drag you from one distraction to the next. You mistake indulgence for freedom, but indulgence without structure always decays into addiction, and addiction is the harshest master of all. It promises pleasure but delivers emptiness, and once it has its grip on you, it takes far more strength to escape than it would have taken to prevent in the first place. The chaos that follows avoidance does not stay contained. It spreads. Neglect in one area of life bleeds into others. Fail to take responsibility for your work, and it infects your relationships with stress and disappointment. Fail to take responsibility for your health, and it diminishes your ability to contribute to your family or your community. Fail to take responsibility for your truth, and you begin to lie, and lies multiply until you can no longer distinguish who you are from the mask you wear. Chaos grows, and in the absence of responsibility, it grows unchecked. What you must recognize is that responsibility is the structure that shields you from this descent. It is the barrier between you and the chaos waiting outside the fragile order of your life. Without it, you fall prey to meaninglessness, and when life becomes meaningless, suffering is unbearable. You cannot escape responsibility without paying the price, and that price is the slow erosion of your soul into emptiness. Meaning is not something you stumble upon by chance or something that arrives effortlessly in your life. It is forged in the fires of responsibility, created when you willingly pick up the heaviest load you can bear. People often wander aimlessly searching for happiness, thinking that the purpose of life is to feel good, to be comfortable, or to eliminate pain altogether. But happiness is fleeting, and comfort dulls the soul. What truly endures is meaning, and meaning is discovered when you take on a burden that matters, when you decide to shoulder weight voluntarily instead of being crushed by it unwillingly. That is when your existence ceases to be shallow and begins to take on depth and significance. Responsibility provides the foundation upon which meaning is built because it demands sacrifice. When you choose to take responsibility for yourself, for your family, for your community, you are saying that life is worth the effort, that the suffering is not meaningless, that you are strong enough to face it and shape it into something worthwhile. This act of carrying transforms pain into purpose. The long hours you dedicate to your work are no longer just exhaustion. They become an investment in your future and in the well-being of those who depend on you. The struggles of raising a child, caring for a loved one, or pursuing a demanding goal stop being burdens that crush you and instead become sources of dignity and strength. Without responsibility, meaning slips through your fingers. You might feel momentary pleasure, but pleasure without purpose is empty. It vanishes as quickly as it comes, leaving behind an ache for something deeper. This is why so many people, despite having wealth, leisure, and comfort, still find themselves lost, restless, and despairing. They have avoided responsibility in the hope of securing happiness, but in doing so, they have stripped their lives of meaning. And without meaning, suffering becomes intolerable because there is nothing to justify it, nothing to balance the scales against the inevitable pain of existence. Responsibility does more than give your life direction. It reveals the best version of who you are. When you carry a heavy burden, you discover the depths of your strength, discipline, and resilience. You prove to yourself that you are capable of more than you imagined. This is why responsibility is not just a duty, but an opportunity. It is the chance to become the kind of person who can stand firm even when life is unbearably difficult. And it is in that act of carrying that you find meaning, because meaning is inseparable from growth, from sacrifice, from the act of becoming someone who voluntarily confronts suffering instead of shrinking away from it. Meaning emerges in proportion to the weight you bear. The heavier the responsibility you choose to carry, the deeper and more profound the sense of meaning you create. It is not in the avoidance of suffering, but in the transformation of it, that life's true value is revealed. Comfort, distraction, and victimhood are presented in the modern world as solutions, as if they could protect you from the inevitable suffering of existence. But in reality, they are traps that waste your potential and strip you of strength. Comfort lures you into believing that ease is the highest aim of life, that the purpose of existence is to rest, to relax, to avoid discomfort at all costs. But comfort is deceptive, because the longer you remain in it, the weaker you become. Muscles that are never strained grow soft, skills that are never used wither away, and minds that are never challenged become dull. The comfort you believe is protecting you is silently eroding the very capacities you need to survive. And when the unavoidable storms of life arrive, you will discover that you have no resilience left to meet them. Comfort might soothe you temporarily, but it leaves you unprepared for reality, and reality punishes weakness without mercy. Distraction is another snare that masquerades as relief but functions as a slow poison. Endless entertainment, constant scrolling, addictive substances, shallow conversations, and meaningless pursuits fill the void left behind by responsibility and purpose. They keep you occupied, but they do not nourish you. Distraction numbs the anxiety of knowing you are not living as you should. But the moment the distraction fades, the same emptiness returns, stronger than before. Every hour spent on distractions that do not build you is an hour lost, a piece of your life you cannot reclaim. And the tragedy is that people often mistake distraction for life itself, stringing together meaningless moments until they realize, too late, that they have wasted years running from themselves. Distraction is not harmless. It is a thief that steals your time, and time is the one resource you cannot replenish. Victimhood is perhaps the most corrosive of all, because it not only prevents growth, but actively destroys your character. When you embrace the role of the victim, you hand over your agency and declare that life is something happening to you rather than something you are responsible for shaping. You assign blame outward, to society, to your family, to fate. And in doing so, you refuse to face the truth that you have the power to act. This posture may win you sympathy, but it costs you your strength. You may feel justified in your suffering, but justification does not heal despair. Victimhood shrinks your world into bitterness and resentment eats away at you from the inside until nothing is left but anger and hopelessness. These three traps share one common feature. They promise relief from responsibility while delivering only weakness, stagnation, and despair. They tempt you with the illusion of safety, but in reality, they waste your potential and rob you of meaning. To live in comfort, to hide in distraction, or to cling to victimhood is to abandon the very path that leads to strength, purpose, and transformation. You have a moral obligation to yourself and to others to rise up and take responsibility, because the consequences of neglect are never confined to you alone. Every life is woven into a larger network of relationships, communities, and generations, and when you refuse to shoulder your share of responsibility, the burden does not disappear. It is simply shifted onto the shoulders of others. Your weakness becomes their weight, your avoidance becomes their struggle, and your refusal to act contributes to the chaos and disorder that spreads outward like ripples in water. This is why responsibility is not just personal but deeply moral, because it affects far more than your own existence. When you rise up and take responsibility, you are not only stabilizing your own life, you are creating stability for everyone connected to you. A parent who refuses to take responsibility for their children does not merely waste their own potential, but damages the future of those children, who must then carry scars and disadvantages that were never theirs to bear. A worker who neglects their duties does not merely harm their own career, but undermines the trust and functioning of the team depending on them. A citizen who ignores their obligations to their community contributes to the decay of the society that shelters them. Your actions, or your failures to act, always extend beyond yourself, and that is why responsibility is not optional if you wish to live honorably. There is also a moral obligation inward, toward yourself, because you know what you could become if you truly stood up. Deep down, you carry within you an image of the person you are capable of being. Stronger, more disciplined, more courageous, more honest. When you neglect responsibility, you betray that vision, and betrayal of yourself is one of the most destructive acts you can commit. It leaves you with bitterness, guilt, and shame because you recognize that you are living beneath your potential. To stand up and take responsibility is to honor that inner image, to pay respect to the person you could be rather than settling for the person you have become by default. It is a moral obligation because you are accountable to your own future, to the version of yourself that could exist if you had the courage to act now. The moral weight of responsibility also lies in its ability to create meaning, not only for you, but for others. When you take responsibility, you inspire those around you to do the same. Your actions serve as proof that strength and order are possible even in the face of chaos. By rising up, you lift others as well, showing them through example that despair is not the final word. In this way, responsibility becomes a duty that extends outward, a light you carry not just for yourself, but for everyone stumbling in darkness. To neglect that duty is to contribute to the spread of chaos. To embrace it is to participate in the creation of order and meaning in the world. Responsibility transforms you because it demands more of you than you think you can give, and in that demand, it forces you to grow into someone stronger, more disciplined, and more capable than you were before. When you willingly pick up a burden, you are no longer the same person who stood idle and hesitant. You are remade in the act of carrying. Every task you choose to accept, every difficulty you confront, every obligation you meet head-on becomes a chiseling force that shapes your character, carves away weakness, and reveals resilience that would have remained hidden if life had been easy. Transformation does not happen in comfort. because comfort asks nothing of you, but responsibility asks everything, and in answering that call, you rise. It is in responsibility that you begin to understand what order truly means. Life left unattended decays into chaos. Your room fills with clutter, your body weakens, your relationships fracture, and your spirit darkens. Responsibility pushes back against this entropy by creating order in the midst of inevitable disorder. Something as small as keeping your commitments or as large as dedicating yourself to raising a family are acts of defiance against chaos. And with each act, you bring more stability not only to your own life but to the lives of others. The more responsibility you take, the more order you create, and that order becomes a fortress that protects you against despair. Strength is not given, it is earned through responsibility. The weight you carry trains you in the same way resistance strengthens muscle. Every challenge accepted is a form of training for your soul, forcing you to build courage, persistence, and clarity of purpose. You do not become strong by avoiding hardship. You become strong by carrying it willingly. People admire those who are capable of standing firm, not because they are free from difficulty, but because they have chosen to confront it. That admiration exists because deep down, we all recognize that strength born of responsibility is the highest form of human development. Responsibility also reshapes how you see yourself. Without it, you remain fragile, uncertain, and consumed by doubt. With it, you begin to see yourself as someone capable of confronting chaos, someone who can make a difference, someone worthy of respect. This self-perception is not built on fantasies or illusions, but on real proof gathered from experience. You stood up, you carried the burden, and you survived it. That memory becomes a foundation you can rely on in moments of doubt, because you know from direct experience that you are capable of withstanding more than you thought possible. Ultimately, responsibility is what pulls you upward when everything else drags you down. It rescues you from the spiral of victimhood, bitterness, and despair by giving you a mission larger than yourself. It transforms you from a passive participant in life into an active creator of meaning and order. Through responsibility, you are not only changed, you are elevated into the person you were meant to become. The alternative to responsibility is not freedom, as many people mistakenly believe, but a slow descent into resentment, bitterness, and despair. When you refuse to shoulder the weight of your own life, the burdens do not vanish. They simply shift into psychological torment that corrodes your spirit from within. Resentment begins quietly, as a whisper that life is unfair, that others have more than you, that you deserve better without effort. It builds when you compare yourself to those who took responsibility and see them advancing while you remain stagnant. Instead of recognizing your own neglect, you turn outward, searching for someone or something to blame, because blaming feels easier than confronting the truth that you have abandoned your duty. Bitterness grows from that resentment, turning your outlook sour and hostile. You begin to view others not as fellow human beings, but as enemies who stand in the way of your comfort. You resent their success because it reminds you of your failure. You resent their discipline because it exposes your laziness. You resent their happiness because it highlights your emptiness. Bitterness does not remain hidden. It leaks into your words, your tone, your actions, poisoning your relationships and pushing away the very people you most need. Those who live in bitterness isolate themselves without realizing it, convinced the world is against them, when in reality it is their refusal to take responsibility that has built the prison around them. When resentment and bitterness are allowed to take root, despair follows. Despair is the collapse of meaning, the dark conviction that nothing matters. that life is nothing but pain without purpose. This is the inevitable end for those who consistently refuse responsibility, because without responsibility, there is no structure to bear the suffering of existence. Pain without meaning is unbearable, and despair is its voice. Despair tells you that you are powerless, that no effort will matter, that the world is hopeless, and in believing it, you condemn yourself to a self-fulfilling prophecy of weakness and stagnation. The tragedy is that all of this is preventable, because it begins with a simple refusal to accept responsibility. Every step away from responsibility is a step toward resentment. Every excuse, every avoidance, every neglected duty is a seed planted in the soil of your character, and those seeds grow into bitterness that chokes out gratitude, love, and joy. Left unchecked, this inner corruption becomes despair so heavy it crushes not only you but those around you, because despair is never isolated. It drags down families, friendships, and entire communities. This is why responsibility is not just a choice, but the antidote to the poison of resentment. By standing up and taking on what is properly yours, you cut off the roots of bitterness before they spread. You protect yourself from despair by building a foundation of meaning strong enough to endure suffering. Responsibility is the shield that guards against the corrosive alternatives, the only force strong enough to prevent your life from collapsing into anger and hopelessness. So much of life comes down to a single decision, whether you will waste it in avoidance and weakness or rise up and shoulder the responsibility that grants it meaning. The call is not abstract, not distant, not something reserved for heroes in myths or great figures of history. It is a call directed at you in your own life, in your own daily actions, in the choices that seem small but add up to everything. To stop wasting your life is to recognize that every hour you let slip away to distraction, indulgence, or avoidance is a piece of your existence you will never recover. Time is ruthless in its passage, and it does not pause while you hesitate. Each moment is a question: will you stand up, or will you continue to let life drift past you unused? Standing up means facing chaos directly instead of pretending it isn't there. Life is full of suffering, complexity, and unpredictability, and no amount of comfort or denial can erase that fact. But by taking responsibility, you meet that chaos voluntarily and turn it into order. It might begin with something as small as cleaning your room, setting your schedule, or telling the truth when lying would be easier. But each act of responsibility is a brick laid in the foundation of meaning. Slowly, you build a structure strong enough to withstand storms. That strength is not theoretical. It becomes part of you, embodied in your habits, your choices, and your character. Carrying your burden does not make life easier in the shallow sense of comfort, but it makes life bearable in the profound sense of purpose. To carry responsibility is to lift weight willingly. To accept that struggle is the price of meaning, and to discover that the load transforms you as you bear it. It is paradoxical. The heaviest burdens, once accepted, make you lighter. They strip away the aimlessness, the emptiness, the restless hunger for something undefined, because now your suffering has direction. You know why you endure, and that knowledge is enough to keep you moving even when everything else threatens to collapse. Creating meaning is not optional if you want to avoid despair, and responsibility is the only reliable path to it. Meaning does not come from chasing pleasure or avoiding pain. It comes from knowing that you have taken on the duty that belongs to you, and that through your effort, something good has been built, however small. This is why people feel profound fulfillment after hard work, sacrifice, and discipline, while they feel hollow after indulgence. Responsibility ties your existence to something greater than yourself, and in doing so, it rescues you from the trap of nihilism. The call is clear: stop wasting your life, stand up straight, carry the weight that is yours to carry, and take responsibility. That is not just advice. It is a necessity if you want to live in a way that justifies the suffering of existence. Meaning waits on the other side of responsibility, and it is there, and only there, that you will truly find yourself. Life is short, and suffering is inevitable, but you are not powerless. You can stop wasting your time, you can stand up, and you can take responsibility. In that act, you will find strength, you will create order, and you will discover meaning deep enough to justify existence itself. Do not wait, begin now. The weight you choose to carry is the very thing that will lift you.